My sister insisted I give my cornea to her daughter because she's a model who needs her eyes for her career, while I'm just a programmer who stares at screens all day. My sister Gina called me in February demanding I donate my cornea to her daughter Mia, who needed a transplant after an infection damaged her vision. I told her I was sorry to hear about Mia's condition and asked why Gina wasn't donating herself, since she was the mother and would be the best match. Can you believe someone could look you straight in the eye and tell you your body parts, your vision, were simply less valuable than theirs? My own sister did. And that shocking moment was just the beginning of a relentless, months-long campaign to manipulate me into donating my cornea, all because she thought her career mattered more than my health. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my family, and honestly, it still gives me chills. So, here's the crazy story. My niece Mia needed a cornea transplant. It was a terrible situation, and of course my heart broke for her. But then my sister Gina stepped in with a solution that defied belief. She actually laughed when she said she was a professional model who needed both eyes for her career, while I just worked from home as a programmer. So losing vision in one eye wouldn't affect my income. She genuinely, truly said my appearance didn't matter for my job, but her face was her livelihood, so it made logical sense for me to be the donor. I was floored, stunned. I told her straight up that was insane. There was no way I was giving up my cornea because she thought her eyes were more valuable than mine. Her response? I was being selfish. She pointed out Mia was young with her whole life ahead, while I was 35 and single, so I didn't need perfect vision to attract anyone. She even added that I spent all day looking at computer screens anyway, so one eye would be sufficient for my lifestyle. My lifestyle. Can you even imagine? When I flat out refused, Gina went into overdrive. She started calling me every single day, each time with some new, twisted argument. Models needed depth perception for photo shoots, she'd say, while programmers could work with one eye. She had contracts specifying she maintain her appearance. I had no such obligations. Her husband, Leo, would leave her if she had any facial surgeries, but I had nobody to impress. And the kicker? Since I wore glasses anyway, people already knew my eyes weren't perfect, so losing vision in one wouldn't change anything. The sheer audacity was mind-boggling. By March, the pressure cooker really ramped up. Gina had recruited our mother. Mom called, her voice heavy with guilt, explaining Gina's modeling career supported her entire family, while I only had myself to worry about. She said it would be devastating for Mia to grow up watching her mother's career destroyed when there was a simple solution available. I should think about what was best for the whole family, rather than being stubborn about something that wouldn't really affect my life. I had to ask, if it was so simple, why didn't she donate her cornea? Her answer? She was too old and might not be a good match. Convenient. Then our father joined the campaign. He said I needed to step up as an aunt and that Gina had already sacrificed so much as a mother. Sacrificed? I asked what sacrifice is, since Gina had a nanny and housekeeper and barely spent time with Mia between modeling gigs. He snapped that wasn't the point, and I was being difficult just to hurt Gina, who he claimed had always been jealous of me. Jealous of me? I asked him if he was going to donate his cornea. His excuse? Men weren't as good matches for young girls. The hypocrisy was sickening. Next, Gina's husband, Leo, started texting me. He'd send articles about how people lived normal lives with vision in one eye, saying thousands managed fine, and I was making a big deal over nothing. Then he offered me $50,000 for my cornea, like it was a business transaction. My jaw dropped. When I said no amount of money would make me give up my body parts for someone who wouldn't do the same, he called me greedy and said I was putting a price on Mia's vision. I shot back that Gina was the one putting a price on it by refusing to donate herself. The harassment escalated to a truly despicable level. Gina told Mia that Aunt Julia didn't want to help her see again. Mia, my sweet 9-year-old niece, started sending me crying voice messages, asking why I didn't love her enough to help. Gina had coached her, telling her Mommy needed her eyes for work, but Aunt Julia just used computers all day. A 9-year-old was now guilt-tripping me because her mother was too vain to donate her own cornea. I'd had enough. I decided I was going to expose Gina's selfishness once and for all. That's when I called Gina's modeling agency. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm as I asked to speak to her manager. I explained the entire situation, laying out everything, and asked point-blank if Gina would really lose contracts for donating a cornea to her daughter. The manager was horrified. "Of course not," she exclaimed. "That would be discrimination. No client would punish a mother for helping her sick child. In fact, she said it would probably generate positive publicity and show Gina as a devoted mother." She was disgusted that Gina was trying to pressure others while using her career as an excuse. The manager called Gina immediately. She told Gina the agency fully supported her donating to Mia and would work around any recovery time needed. She also said she was disappointed that Gina had lied about career consequences to avoid helping her own daughter. Gina called me screaming, "You've ruined everything." I hung up on her. I just hung up. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. My hands were trembling as I put the phone down on my desk. The modeling agency manager had just confirmed what I suspected all along. Gina was lying, using her career as a shield, and now she was furious at me for exposing her selfishness instead of being ashamed of her own behavior. I stared at my computer screen, the code I'd been working on a blur. My chest felt tight. I couldn't quite catch my breath. She actually thought I ruined everything by calling her agency. Not that she ruined everything by refusing to help her own daughter. Not that she spent weeks manipulating and pressuring me, but that I was the problem for finding out the truth. My phone started buzzing constantly about 20 minutes later. Text after text from Gina filled my screen. She called me vindictive, accused me of sabotaging her relationship with her agency. She said I went behind her back to destroy her career when I could have just donated quietly like a good sister. I read each message as it came through, and my anger simmered, then built. Every single text revealed exactly what her priorities were. Not Mia's vision, not doing the right thing as a mother, just her career, her appearance, her reputation. I started taking screenshots of every single message. Her rage was showing everyone the truth about who she really was. 15 texts in the first hour, each one more angry than the last. She said I was jealous of her success, always had been, that I couldn't stand that she was beautiful and famous while I was just a programmer nobody knew, that I wanted to hurt her because I was bitter about my own boring life. My phone rang that evening around 7. Leo's name. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. His voice sounded completely different from his previous business-like offers. He sounded tired, worn down. He said he hadn't known Gina had lied about the agency's position until the manager called her. He admitted he'd thought the career consequences were real. Then he asked, his voice laced with resentment, if I was satisfied now that I'd embarrassed his wife. I told him I was satisfied that Mia might actually get the cornea she needed from her own mother. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said Gina was refusing to talk to anyone and had locked herself in their bedroom. I said that wasn't my problem to fix. He sighed and hung up without saying goodbye. I called Celeste, my best friend, right after I got off the phone with Leo. She picked up on the second ring, and I just poured it all out. Everything that had happened over the past month. The daily calls from Gina, Mom, and Dad joining the pressure campaign. Leo offered me $50,000. Mia's coached guilt messages. Then calling the agency, finding out Gina had been lying the whole time. Celeste was quiet, just listening. When I finished, she said she couldn't believe they tried to convince me my eyes were less valuable because I'm a programmer. She pointed out that I needed perfect vision for coding work, just as much as Gina needed it for modeling. Maybe more, since I worked with tiny text on screens all day. She said the whole family pressure campaign was crazy and wrong. Celeste asked why Gina was so resistant to donating if the agency confirmed there would be no career consequences. I realized I didn't actually know Gina's real objection beyond vanity and fear of surgery. Celeste suggested Gina might have deeper fears about medical procedures that she was hiding behind career excuses. Maybe she was actually scared of the surgery itself and used her modeling career as a shield. I thought about that for a while after we hung up. It still didn't excuse trying to manipulate me into surgery, but it made Gina seem more human, less like a monster. 2 days after the agency confrontation, my mother called. Her voice sounded hesitant, completely different from her previous pressuring tone. She said she'd talked to Gina's manager herself to verify what happened. She felt terrible about pushing me so hard when Gina had been lying to all of us. She apologized for not believing me when I said Gina was being selfish. But her apology, it sounded more like she was sorry she backed the wrong horse. Not sorry she tried to pressure me into giving up a body part. Not sorry she thought my career and appearance mattered less than Gina's. Just sorry that Gina made her look bad by lying. I told my mother that her apology didn't address the core problem. She thought it was acceptable to pressure me into donating, regardless of Gina's lies. She believed my career and appearance mattered less than Gina's. She thought my bodily autonomy was negotiable for family convenience. Mom got quiet on the other end. She said she needed to think about what I said. Then she hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding my phone, feeling empty. Part of me wanted her to understand. Part of me knew she probably never would. My father called the next day. His tone was defensive right from the start. He said I was being too hard on my mother, who was just trying to help Mia. He claimed the whole family was tricked by Gina's career excuse, and now I was punishing them for believing her. I pointed out that they all believed her because it fit their existing view, that Gina's needs mattered more than mine, that her career was more important than my career, that her appearance was more valuable than my appearance. Dad got angry and said I was twisting everything around. He said they just wanted what was best for Mia. I asked why what was best for Mia had to come from me instead of her own mother. He didn't have an answer for that. Gina didn't contact me directly for a week after the agency incident. Leo texted occasionally with updates. Gina was meeting with the transplant coordinator, having medical tests done, talking to the surgical team. He never said Gina was wrong. He never actually apologized for his part in pressuring me. But his messages had an apologetic tone about the whole situation getting out of hand. Like this was some accident that happened, instead of a deliberate campaign to manipulate me into surgery. Then, on a Thursday morning, I received a call from Raymond Holt at the transplant center. He asked if I was still willing to be evaluated as a backup donor in case Gina wasn't a suitable match for Mia. I was shocked they were contacting me at all. I asked if Gina requested this. Raymond said it was standard procedure to have backup donors identified. My name, he explained, was on the original paperwork Gina submitted weeks ago, before she ever asked me directly, before the pressure campaign even started. She had just assumed I'd agree once she pushed hard enough. She put my name down like my body belonged to the family instead of to me. I told Raymond I needed some time to think about the backup donor thing. He said that was completely fine, and I should take whatever time I needed to feel comfortable with my decision. His voice stayed calm and professional through the entire conversation, which I appreciated after weeks of family members screaming at me. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. The realization hit me hard. Gina had put my name down on those forms weeks ago, back when she first started her pressure campaign. She never actually asked if I wanted to be evaluated as a backup donor. She just assumed I'd eventually cave once she pushed hard enough. She treated my body like family property that she could claim whenever she needed it. That assumption made me furious all over again, even though I'd already been angry for weeks. She'd been so confident in her ability to manipulate me that she'd filled out official medical paperwork with my information before ever having a real conversation about it. Celeste came over that Saturday afternoon with coffee and pastries. We sat on my couch, and I told her everything about Raymond's call and the backup donor situation. She listened quietly while I explained how conflicted I felt. Part of me genuinely wanted to help Mia, who was just a kid caught in the middle of adult problems. But another part of me worried that agreeing to be backup would send the message that my family's manipulation tactics worked. Celeste pointed out something I hadn't fully considered. Being a backup donor meant I'd only donate if Gina medically couldn't. It wasn't the same as being first choice or letting my family pressure me into surgery. If Gina went through with her donation like she was supposed to, I'd never actually have to donate at all. I admitted that made sense, but I still felt weird about the whole situation. Celeste said that was totally normal, given how my family had treated me for the past 2 months. She suggested I might want to talk to a professional therapist about processing everything that had happened, since family manipulation campaigns weren't exactly standard life experiences that friends could fully help with. I spent Sundays searching online for therapists specializing in family dynamics and boundary issues. Most of the websites looked generic, but one therapist, Miriam Shepard, had a profile that mentioned working with adults dealing with family pressure and guilt. Her office was only 20 minutes from my apartment. I called her number Monday morning and briefly explained I needed help processing a complicated family situation involving medical pressure. She had an opening the following Thursday, and I booked it immediately. I'd never done therapy before. My family always acted like therapy was something other people needed, not us. But this whole cornea situation had me questioning basically every family relationship I had, and I needed someone objective to help me sort through it all. Thursday afternoon, I drove to Miriam's office, feeling a knot of nerves. Her waiting room had comfortable chairs and calm music playing softly. When she called me back, she looked like a regular person, not some intimidating expert. She asked me what brought me in, and I started explaining the cornea donation demand. Once I started talking, everything just poured out. Gina's initial call, the daily pressure, my mother's calls about family obligations, my father's accusations of jealousy, Leo's $50,000 offer, Mia's coached guilt messages, the modeling agency confrontation, and now the backup donor situation. Miriam asked detailed questions about my childhood and relationship with Gina. As I answered, I started noticing patterns I'd never really thought about before. Gina was always the pretty one, whose modeling career started when she was 12. Our parents treated her modeling work like this precious thing that needed protection. I was the smart one who got good grades and went to college for computer science. Everyone expected me to be self-sufficient and understanding about Gina's needs coming first. When Gina needed money for modeling portfolios, I was expected to understand why my college fund got raided. When Gina needed our parents' attention for auditions and photo shoots, I was expected to not complain about being left alone. This pattern went back decades, and I just accepted it as normal family dynamics. Miriam used a term I'd never heard before: parentification in reverse. Usually, parentification meant older kids had to take care of younger siblings like a parent would. But in my family, I was expected to sacrifice for my younger sister because her needs got framed as more important than mine. My role was to be the responsible one who didn't need anything, while Gina got to be the special one who needed everything. Miriam said my instinct to refuse the donation demand was actually healthy self-preservation, not selfishness like my family claimed. She explained that I'd spent my whole life accepting that my needs mattered less than Gina's. And finally saying no was me starting to value myself properly. I actually started crying right there in her office, which surprised me. I hadn't cried through this whole situation, despite all the pressure and manipulation. But sitting there, hearing someone validate that my feelings were reasonable and my boundaries were healthy, just broke something open inside me. I realized I'd spent 35 years believing that being a good sister and daughter meant making myself smaller so Gina could be bigger. Miriam handed me tissues and said we had a lot to work through, but she was glad I came in. We scheduled another appointment for the following week. 2 weeks after the modeling agency confrontation, Leo started texting me updates about Gina's medical evaluation at the transplant center. He said the testing was taking all day and involved multiple scans and procedures. Gina was apparently anxious about all the medical stuff and kept asking how much longer everything would take. His messages had this tone like he expected me to respond with sympathy or encouragement. I read each text, then put my phone down without replying. I wasn't ready to provide emotional support to someone who'd spent a month trying to manipulate me into surgery. Gina made her choice to donate, and now she had to deal with the medical process that came with it. My sympathy reserves were completely empty after everything she'd put me through. Leo sent one more text that evening, saying Gina was done with testing and exhausted. I still didn't respond. He could comfort his own wife about the consequences of her own decisions. Raymond called me on Tuesday morning with news about Gina's evaluation results. His voice had a different quality than our previous conversation, more careful, somehow. He explained that Gina's testing revealed she had early-stage keratoconus in her other eye. I had to ask what that meant, since I didn't know much about eye conditions. He said keratoconus was a condition where the cornea gradually thins and bulges outward. Gina's case was early stage and mild, but it made her a less ideal donor than they initially expected. She could still donate to Mia, but there was a slightly higher risk of complications during and after the surgery. Because of this finding, the transplant team wanted to proceed with evaluating me as the backup option. They wanted to have a strong backup donor ready in case Gina's surgery ran into problems or if her recovery didn't go well. I felt this complicated mix of emotions hearing the news. Part of me felt vindicated that Gina wasn't the perfect donor she'd assumed she was when she claimed her eyes were more valuable than mine. But I also felt dread creeping back in that I might get pulled into the situation after all. I'd worked so hard to maintain my boundaries, and now there was a real medical reason I might need to donate. I told Raymond I needed 48 hours to make a decision about the backup evaluation. He said that was fine and to call him back when I was ready. As soon as we hung up, I called Miriam's office and asked if she had any emergency phone session availability. Her receptionist said Miriam could do a phone call that afternoon. When Miriam called me at 3, I explained the new development with Gina's evaluation results. She asked how I felt about potentially being needed as a backup donor now that there was a medical reason, rather than just family pressure. I admitted I felt confused and guilty. Miriam helped me work through separating Mia's legitimate medical needs from my family's manipulation tactics over the past months. She pointed out that I could choose to help Mia without accepting my family's story that I was obligated to be the first choice donor. If I decided to proceed with backup evaluation, it would be my independent choice made for my own reasons, not me giving into pressure. That distinction felt important, somehow. I wasn't capitulating to my family's demands. I was making my own decision about whether to potentially help my niece. I called Celeste that evening and talked through everything again. She asked what I actually wanted to do, separate from all the family drama and pressure. When I really thought about it, I realized I did want to help Mia if Gina genuinely couldn't donate safely. Mia was innocent in all this and deserved to have her vision restored, but I needed to do it on my own terms, not because my family bullied me into it. Celeste said that sounded like a healthy decision and asked what my terms would be. I thought about it for a while. I wanted it clear that I was doing this for Mia, specifically, not because I accepted my family's belief that my body parts were negotiable. I wanted everyone to understand that if I ended up donating, it was my choice and not me finally doing what I should have done from the start. Celeste said those seemed like reasonable boundaries to maintain. She pointed out that I'd already proven I could stand up to family pressure by refusing for 2 months. Agreeing to backup evaluation now didn't erase that boundary setting or make it meaningless. I called Raymond back Wednesday morning and told him I'd proceed with backup donor evaluation. But I stated clearly that I was doing this for Mia, not because my family pressured me into it. I also said that if I did end up needing to donate, it would be my choice and I wouldn't tolerate anyone framing it as me finally coming around or doing what I should have done initially. Raymond said he understood completely and would note my concerns in the file. He scheduled my evaluation appointments for the following week and sent me information about what to expect. After we hung up, I felt oddly calm about the decision. I'd made my choice based on my own values and reasoning, not family pressure. That felt different, somehow, than everything that came before. My mother called that evening. Her voice sounded relieved when I answered. She said Leo told her I'd agreed to back up donor evaluation, and she wanted to thank me for being reasonable. I cut her off before she could continue with that narrative. I explained firmly that I wasn't being reasonable or coming around to their way of thinking. I was making an independent choice to potentially help my niece, which was completely different from giving in to family pressure. I told her that if I ended up donating, it would be because I chose to help Mia, not because the family manipulation campaign finally worked. My mother got quiet on the other end of the line. She said in a small voice that she understood the difference I was making. She sounded hurt, but also like maybe she actually did understand this time. She said she was glad I was willing to be evaluated as backup and that she hoped Gina's donation would go smoothly so I wouldn't need to. We hung up without the usual family pleasantries, and I sat there feeling tired, but also stronger somehow. I'd maintained my boundaries, even while agreeing to help. That felt like progress. I walked into the medical center the following week and checked in. The receptionist handed me a clipboard with forms asking about my medical history. Pages and pages of questions about surgeries, medications, family health problems, smoking, alcohol. After turning in the paperwork, a nurse called me back and led me through a maze of hallways to the ophthalmology department. She took my blood pressure and temperature, then led me to the first testing room. The eye scans were nothing like my regular vision checkups. The technician positioned my head in a machine that felt like sticking my face into a tunnel. Then bright lights flashed while the equipment made worrying sounds. She explained they were mapping the surface of my corneas and checking for abnormalities. After that came a different machine that took pictures of the back of my eyes, requiring drops that made everything blurry for 20 minutes. The technician asked detailed questions about my computer usage and whether I experienced eye strain or headaches. I explained my typical work setup with dual monitors and regular breaks, feeling oddly defensive about my screen time, even though nobody was judging me. Next came blood tests in the lab down the hall, where the phlebotomist filled what seemed like a dozen vials for various compatibility screenings and health markers. The ophthalmologist met with me after all the testing finished. She reviewed my results on her computer screen and said my corneal thickness was excellent. My overall eye health was remarkable for someone who spent so much time looking at screens, and I would make a very strong donor candidate if needed. She emphasized the if part, explaining that Gina was still the primary donor and my role was purely backup. Hearing her describe my eyes as excellent made me feel strange, like I was validated in some weird way after weeks of my family implying my vision was less important than Gina's. The doctor went through potential risks if I did end up donating, including infection, vision changes, and the small chance of complications during healing. She stressed that cornea donation was generally safe, but I needed to understand what I was agreeing to. I signed consent forms acknowledging I understood the risks and left the medical center feeling exhausted from hours of testing. The next week, I had another appointment for additional blood work and a consultation with the surgical team. I checked in and sat in the waiting room, flipping through a magazine about eye health. When I looked up, Gina was walking through the entrance with Leo right behind her. Our eyes met across the room, and she immediately looked down at her phone, her face going tight. Leo noticed me and gave an awkward little nod, like he wanted to acknowledge me, but wasn't sure if that was allowed. Neither of them came over to say hello or ask how my evaluation went. Gina found seats on the opposite side of the waiting room and sat with her back partially turned toward me. Leo kept glancing over like he might approach, but Gina grabbed his arm and whispered something that made him stay put. I could feel the tension radiating across the room. Other patients were probably wondering what the drama was between us. When the nurse called my name, I stood up and walked past them to the hallway. Gina kept her eyes fixed on her phone screen, and Leo gave another uncomfortable nod. I followed the nurse without saying anything to either of them, leaving them sitting in that awful silence. Raymond called me at work the following week. His voice was professional but warm as he went through my test results. He explained that my corneal thickness measurements were in the ideal range. My eye health was excellent, and all my blood work came back perfect for transplant compatibility. He said I was actually a better match for Mia than Gina was, due to my overall eye health and the absence of any early markers for corneal problems. But he quickly added that Gina remained an acceptable donor and the medical team was moving forward with her as planned. The final decision about which donor to use would be made by the family and medical team together, considering both medical factors and family preferences. He asked if I had any questions. I asked what made me a better match than Gina, and he explained that my corneas were slightly thicker and healthier, which generally led to better outcomes. He emphasized that Gina could absolutely donate successfully, but if we were comparing the two options purely on medical grounds, I would be the preferred choice. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen without seeing the code in front of me. 2 days later, my phone rang with Gina's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Her voice came through tight and angry before I even finished saying hello. She said she heard from Raymond that I was a better match than her and asked if I was happy about that. I told her I wasn't happy about any of this situation she created, but I was relieved Mia had good options for her transplant. Gina said the doctors were still using her cornea, and she was going through with the surgery in 3 weeks, like she was daring me to argue. I said that was good, and Mia was lucky to have her mother willing to help her. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could hear Gina breathing on the other end. Her tone shifted completely, the anger draining out and leaving something raw and scared. She admitted she was terrified of the surgery, not because of her career or how it might affect her appearance, but because she had never had any medical procedure before. An idea of someone cutting into her eye made her feel sick. She said she'd been having panic attacks about it for the past week, waking up in the middle of the night, unable to breathe. She could barely sleep and kept having nightmares about the surgery going wrong. For the first time in months, she sounded like an actual human being instead of the manipulative person who had been harassing me since February. I felt a flicker of sympathy, despite everything that had happened, understanding that fear of medical procedures was real and valid. I told Gina that her fear was completely understandable and normal. Lots of people felt scared before surgery, especially eye surgery, where you had to be awake and aware of what was happening. I suggested she talk to the surgical team about anxiety management options, like medication before the procedure or techniques to help her stay calm. She was quiet for a moment, then asked in a small voice if I would consider being the donor instead, since I was a better match anyway. I said no firmly. She made this choice when she refused to donate initially and spent weeks trying to manipulate me into surgery instead. Now she needed to follow through with the consequences of her decisions. I wasn't going to rescue her from a situation she created just because she was scared. Her fear was real, but it didn't change what she had done or obligate me to undergo surgery in her place. Gina's voice went hard again. She said I was punishing her by making her go through with surgery when there was a better option available. She accused me of being vindictive and using the situation to get back at her for everything that happened. I explained slowly that I wasn't making her do anything. She was Mia's mother, and she created this entire situation by prioritizing her vanity over her daughter's medical needs. The doctor said she could donate successfully, so she was going to donate. Her being scared now didn't erase the weeks of harassment and manipulation. The phone went dead as she hung up on me. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and felt completely drained, like the conversation had sucked all the energy out of my body. My father called the next day. His voice had that tone he used when he was about to lecture me about family responsibility. He said Gina was having a breakdown about the upcoming surgery, and I needed to step up and donate instead. He went through the same arguments from weeks ago about me being single with no one to impress and my career not depending on my appearance. He said programmers didn't need perfect vision the way models did, and losing sight in one eye wouldn't really affect my lifestyle. I cut him off. I told him those arguments were offensive the first time he made them, and repeating them now didn't make them more valid. My body wasn't negotiable just because I was single or worked from home. I pointed out that Gina spent weeks claiming the surgery would destroy her modeling career. But now that the agency confirmed that was a lie, she switched to claiming she was too scared to go through with it. I said her fear was real, and I understood being scared of medical procedures. But her fear didn't obligate me to undergo surgery instead. She was Mia's mother, and mothers sometimes had to do scary things for their children. He said I was being cold-hearted and cruel, that I had changed since all this started. I asked him what he meant by changed, and he said I used to be understanding and willing to help family. Now I was putting my own comfort ahead of my niece's needs and my sister's well-being. I told him I was putting my bodily autonomy ahead of my family's desire to pressure me into surgery, which was completely different. We argued back and forth until he finally hung up in frustration. I called Miriam and got an appointment for later that week. Sitting in her office, I told her about my father's accusation that I had changed. She asked what I thought about that, and I admitted part of me worried he was right. Maybe I was being cold-hearted by refusing to help when I was the better donor option. Miriam leaned forward and said something that made everything click into place. She pointed out that I hadn't changed at all. I had just stopped automatically prioritizing everyone else's comfort over my own well-being. My family was uncomfortable with this boundary setting because it disrupted their established dynamic where Gina's needs always came first. They interpreted my self-protection as me being difficult or cold because they were used to me accommodating whatever they wanted. She said, "Your family's discomfort with your boundaries doesn't mean the boundaries are wrong. It means the old dynamic was unhealthy and they don't like having to adjust." I sat there processing her words and realized she was completely right. Maintaining these boundaries would mean accepting that some family relationships might not recover, at least not in their old form. My father might always see me as the difficult daughter who refused to help. Gina might never forgive me for not rescuing her from her own choices. But protecting myself was worth that cost. A week before Gina's scheduled surgery, my phone buzzed with a text from Leo asking if we could meet for coffee. I stared at the message for several minutes, unsure if I wanted to sit down with someone who'd tried to buy my cornea like a used car part. But something in his tone felt different from the aggressive texts he'd sent weeks ago. So I agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our neighborhoods. When I walked in and spotted him at a corner table, I barely recognized him. Leo looked like he hadn't slept properly in days, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually neat hair sticking up in odd directions. He stood when he saw me and gave a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. We ordered our drinks and sat in awkward silence for a moment before he started talking. He admitted the past 2 months had been absolute hell in their household. Gina's anxiety about the upcoming surgery had spiraled completely out of control, and Mia kept asking questions neither of them knew how to answer without making things worse. The 9-year-old couldn't understand why all the grown-ups were fighting when everyone supposedly wanted to help her see better. Leo rubbed his face with both hands and said he was exhausted from managing Gina's panic attacks while trying to keep Mia from feeling responsible for the family conflict. Then he did something I didn't expect. He apologized directly for his role in pressuring me, specifically mentioning the $50,000 offer. He said he'd been thinking like a problem solver, trying to find a solution everyone could accept, treating the whole situation like a business negotiation where money could fix anything. He looked genuinely uncomfortable as he admitted he'd been completely wrong to turn my bodily autonomy into a business transaction. His apology felt more real than anything my parents had attempted, probably because he was taking specific accountability for specific actions, instead of vague, sorry you feel that way statements. I told him I appreciated the apology and that it meant something that he understood exactly what he'd done wrong. We sat there, drinking our coffee, and I found myself curious about something that had been bothering me. I asked Leo why Gina was so resistant to the surgery beyond just general fear, since the medical risks were actually pretty minimal and recovery was supposed to be relatively quick. He got quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup like the answer might be floating in there. Then he admitted something I hadn't expected. Gina had always been scared of anything that might affect her appearance, even temporarily. Not just modeling career scared, but deep down terrified in a way he didn't fully understand. She'd built her entire identity and sense of self around being beautiful since she was a kid, starting modeling at 12 years old. The idea of facial surgery, even minor eye surgery that wouldn't leave visible scars, threatened her sense of who she was at a level he couldn't really comprehend. Leo said he tried to talk to her about it, but she just got defensive and insisted it was about her career, which was easier to argue about than admitting she was scared of losing the one thing she felt made her valuable. His explanation helped me understand Gina's psychology better without excusing her behavior. I told Leo that Gina's identity issues and fears didn't justify trying to manipulate me into surgery through family pressure and coaching Mia to guilt-trip me. He nodded and said he completely agreed that understanding where Gina was coming from didn't make what she did okay. I added that maybe this whole experience would help Gina develop a sense of self beyond her appearance, force her to realize she had value that wasn't tied to her face. Leo nodded sadly and said he hoped so, but wasn't optimistic about Gina actually learning anything from the situation. He said his wife had a pattern of blaming others when things went wrong instead of examining her own behavior, and he didn't see this being different. We finished our coffee, and Leo thanked me for meeting him. As we left the coffee shop, I felt like I understood the whole mess better, even if I was still angry about how it had unfolded. 3 days before Gina's surgery, my mother called and invited me to family dinner at her house. I declined immediately, not ready to sit through an awkward meal with everyone pretending the past months hadn't happened. But then my mother said Mia would be there and really wanted to see me. She said my niece kept asking when Aunt Julia was coming over again. I felt trapped because I didn't want to punish Mia for her mother's behavior. So I agreed to come for Mia's sake. I knew it would be uncomfortable, but I wanted to maintain some connection with my niece through all this adult conflict. When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, the atmosphere was so tense you could practically taste it. Everyone was being overly polite and carefully avoiding any mention of corneas, surgeries, or the massive family fight that had consumed the past months. Mia ran up and hugged me as soon as I walked in, wrapping her small arms around my waist. She looked up at me with her damaged vision and asked if I was still mad at Mommy. I knelt down to her level and told her that grown-ups sometimes disagree about important things, but I loved her very much and none of this was her fault. She seemed satisfied with that answer and pulled me toward the living room to show me a new toy. Dinner itself was painful, with how fake pleasant everyone acted. My father asked about my work in this overly interested tone, like he was trying to prove he cared about my career. My mother kept offering me more food and fussing over whether I was comfortable. Gina sat across the table from me and barely made eye contact, pushing food around her plate and responding to questions in short sentences. Leo tried to keep conversation flowing with safe topics about weather and neighborhood news. Mia chattered happily about school, oblivious to the tension surrounding her. After dinner, Mia pulled me aside to her room and asked if I wanted to see her drawings. As we sat on her bedroom floor, she suddenly asked in a small voice if I was going to give her my eye, since Mommy was scared. I felt shocked that she knew these details and wondered what conversations she'd overheard or what Gina had told her. I carefully explained that Mommy was going to be very brave and help her, and that sometimes being brave means doing things even when we're scared. Mia nodded seriously and said she was scared too about the surgery. I told her that was okay, that it was normal to be scared of things we don't understand. She seemed satisfied with this answer and showed me drawings she'd made about getting to see clearly again after the surgery. The pictures showed her seeing flowers and butterflies and her family's faces in bright colors. My heart hurt looking at these hopeful drawings from a kid who'd been caught in the middle of adult manipulation. As I was leaving the family dinner, pulling on my jacket near the front door, Gina suddenly appeared and caught me before I could escape. She said she was sorry for everything that happened. Her apology came out rushed and uncomfortable, the words tumbling over each other like she'd practiced them, but didn't really mean them. I could tell someone had told her she needed to apologize, rather than her genuinely understanding what she'd done wrong. She kept glancing toward the living room where everyone else was, like she was performing for an audience. I thanked her for apologizing, but didn't say I forgave her, and her face tightened with clear disappointment at my response. She'd expected me to immediately accept and move on, returning to our normal family dynamic. When I didn't give her that satisfaction, she turned and walked away without another word. The day before Gina's surgery, Leo texted me that Gina was at the hospital for pre-op appointments and asked him to let me know the surgery was scheduled for tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. I appreciated the update and sent a message back saying I hoped everything went smoothly for Mia's sake. I deliberately didn't include any personal well wishes for Gina, and Leo didn't seem surprised by the omission. He just sent back a thumbs up and said he'd update me after the surgery. I tried to work the day of Gina's surgery, but found myself completely unable to focus on my code. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for updates, even though I told myself I didn't care how Gina was doing. Around noon, Leo finally texted that the surgery went well and Gina was in recovery. The transplant would happen tomorrow once they'd prepared Mia and confirmed the cornea was viable for the procedure. I felt this complicated mix of relief for Mia and weird emotions about Gina. I was glad she'd gone through with it and Mia would get the medical care she needed. But I was still angry about the months of manipulation, the family pressure campaign, the attempt to make me feel guilty for protecting my own body. Gina doing what she should have done from the beginning didn't erase all the harm she'd caused trying to avoid it. The next morning, Leo started texting me updates about Mia's transplant surgery. The first message came at 7:30, saying they'd just taken her back to the operating room and the surgical team looked confident. I stared at my phone for a minute before responding that I hoped everything went smoothly. Another text arrived around 9 o'clock, saying the procedure was progressing well and the doctors were pleased with how the cornea looked. I tried to focus on work, but kept checking my phone every few minutes. Leo sent another update at 10:30 that they were finishing up and everything had gone perfectly according to the surgical team. I felt this wave of relief wash over me, knowing Mia would finally get the vision correction she needed. The final text came just before noon, confirming Mia was in recovery and the prognosis was excellent for restored vision. She'd need weeks of recovery with special eye drops and limited activity, but the transplant had been successful. I immediately sent back a message saying I was genuinely glad she was doing well and hoped her recovery went smoothly. Leo responded with a simple thank you and said he'd keep me posted on her progress. My mother called 3 days later with that particular tone in her voice that meant she wanted something from me. She started by asking how I was doing and making small talk about the weather before getting to her real reason for calling. She said Gina's recovery was apparently much harder than anyone expected, with significant pain and anxiety about the healing process. She mentioned that Gina was struggling emotionally and could really use some family support right now. The implication was obvious without her directly stating it. She expected me to volunteer to visit or at least call Gina to check on her. I took a breath and told my mother very clearly that Gina had Leo for support, plus the nanny and both her parents living nearby. I pointed out that she wasn't lacking for people to help her through recovery. My mother went quiet for a second before saying that family support was different, and Gina was having a particularly difficult time. I told her directly that I wasn't ready to provide comfort to someone who hadn't genuinely acknowledged the harm she caused over the past months. My mother sighed and said she understood, but clearly didn't agree with my position. She ended the call shortly after that with an awkward goodbye. 2 weeks after both surgeries, my mother called again asking if I wanted to meet her for lunch. She specified just the two of us, without other family members present. She said she'd been thinking a lot about what I said regarding her previous apology and wanted to have a real conversation about our family dynamics. I felt skeptical because my mother had never been one for deep emotional conversations about family patterns. But something in her voice sounded different this time, less defensive and more genuinely uncertain. I agreed to meet her at a restaurant near my apartment the following Saturday. The whole week, I wondered if she was actually ready to acknowledge the problematic patterns or if this was another attempt to smooth things over without real change. Saturday arrived, and I got to the restaurant first, choosing a quiet table near the back. My mother walked in looking nervous and gave me a tentative smile as she sat down. We ordered food and made awkward small talk about work and weather until our meals arrived. Then my mother put down her fork and looked at me with an expression I'd rarely seen on her face. She admitted that she'd always treated Gina as more fragile and in need of protection because of her modeling career and beauty-focused identity. She said watching me stand up to the whole family had made her realize how much she'd dismissed my needs and feelings over the years. She'd always expected me to be the reasonable one who accommodated Gina's demands without complaint. Her voice got shaky as she talked about realizing she'd participated in making me feel less important than my sister. This acknowledgement felt different from her previous apology that had seemed more about smoothing over conflict than genuine understanding. I felt some of the anger I'd been carrying toward her start to soften as she continued talking. My mother asked what she could do to repair our relationship going forward. I appreciated that she was asking instead of assuming things could just go back to normal. I told her honestly that I needed her to stop expecting me to sacrifice for Gina's benefit in the future. I explained that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but it required her treating both daughters' needs as equally important, rather than automatically prioritizing Gina. I said I needed her to respect my boundaries, even when that meant disappointing Gina or making family situations more complicated. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to squeeze my hand. She agreed and said she wanted to do better, that she hadn't realized how much damage the favoritism had caused until the situation forced her to see it clearly. I felt cautiously hopeful for the first time in months that our relationship might actually improve with genuine effort from both of us. 3 weeks after the surgeries, Leo started sending me photos of Mia's progress. The first batch showed her smiling face with a protective eye covering and excited messages about how much better she could already see. He sent updates every few days showing the gradual improvement in her vision. The transplant was healing beautifully according to her doctors, and Mia could see much more clearly than before her infection damaged her eye. One message included a photo of detailed drawings Mia had made, showing flowers and butterflies with intricate patterns she couldn't have seen clearly enough to draw before. Leo's text said she was thrilled about being able to see her mother's face properly again, and kept pointing out small details she'd been missing. I looked at those drawings and felt genuinely happy for my niece. Whatever complicated emotions I had about Gina and the rest of my family, seeing Mia's joy and relief that the medical outcome was successful made everything feel worthwhile. I didn't hear directly from Gina for a full month after her surgery. Leo mentioned occasionally in his updates about Mia that Gina had recovered physically from the procedure, but was dealing with complicated emotions about the whole experience. He said she felt resentful that the surgery had been harder and more painful than she expected. He also mentioned that Gina was angry I'd never acknowledged her sacrifice or thanked her for finally donating to Mia. I told Leo very clearly that Gina doing what mothers are supposed to do for their children wasn't a sacrifice that required my gratitude. She'd spent months trying to manipulate me into surgery while lying about career consequences and coaching Mia to guilt-trip me. Going through with what she should have agreed to immediately didn't earn her praise from me. Leo went quiet after I said that and just sent back a simple acknowledgement that he understood my perspective. My father called 6 weeks after both surgeries with his typical blunt approach to family conflict. He said enough time had passed and the family needed to move forward from all the drama. He wanted to plan a gathering where everyone could put this behind us and get back to normal family relationships. I told him I was willing to attend family events, but that normal needed to mean something different from what it did before. I explained that moving forward required healthier boundaries and mutual respect, rather than just pretending the past months hadn't happened. My father sounded frustrated and said I was making things more complicated than they needed to be. He claimed everyone had apologized and Gina had done the right thing in the end, so we should all just move past it. I pointed out that apologies without changed behavior didn't mean much and that I wasn't going to return to a dynamic where my needs were automatically dismissed. He grumbled about me being stubborn, but eventually agreed that he'd plan a family barbecue and I could attend if I wanted to. 2 months after the surgeries, I drove to my parents' house for the family barbecue my father had organized. I felt nervous pulling into their driveway and seeing Gina's car already parked there. Walking into the backyard, I immediately noticed the awkward atmosphere, with everyone being overly polite and careful about what they said. Gina stood near the grill, talking to Leo, and barely glanced in my direction when I arrived. My mother came over to hug me and whispered that she was glad I came. Then I heard Mia's voice calling my name and turned to see her running across the yard toward me. She crashed into me with a huge hug and immediately started showing me how well she could see now. She pointed at signs across the yard and read them perfectly, then described tiny details on flowers and leaves that she couldn't make out before the transplant. Her happiness and excitement were genuine and infectious. Watching her point out everything she could finally see clearly made enduring the awkward family dynamics completely worth it. Later in the afternoon, I found myself alone on my parents' back porch with Gina. She'd followed me outside when I went to get some air away from the crowd. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a minute before she started talking in a quiet voice. She told me her modeling agency had actually featured her donation in a publicity campaign about devoted mothers. She'd gotten positive feedback from several clients, and the story had generated good press for both her and the agency. Then she admitted very quietly that I'd been right about the career consequences being exaggerated. She said she'd genuinely been terrified of the surgery itself, rather than worried about professional impacts. Her voice got even softer as she explained that she'd never had any kind of medical procedure before, and the idea of someone operating on her eye had caused panic attacks for weeks. It was the closest she'd come to real accountability for her behavior. She wasn't apologizing exactly, but she was acknowledging that her fears had been about the surgery rather than her career, like she'd claimed. I didn't say I forgave her, but I nodded to show I'd heard what she said. We stood there for another moment. Then I told Gina I understood being scared of medical stuff, but that didn't make it okay to pressure me into surgery or coach Mia to guilt-trip me. She shifted her weight and looked down at the porch boards. She said she wished she'd handled everything differently, especially dragging Mia into adult problems. I nodded to show I heard her, but still didn't say I forgave her. We headed back inside where everyone was eating and pretending the tension wasn't still thick in the air. Over the next few months, I kept my distance from Gina while spending more time with my mother and Mia. My father stopped making comments about my appearance or job being less valuable, though he still got defensive when anyone mentioned the pressure campaign. Leo sent me occasional texts checking in and apologizing again for his part in everything, which I actually appreciated since at least he seemed to get why what they'd done was wrong. I started seeing Miriam every other week to work on keeping healthy boundaries with my family while staying connected to the people I cared about. She helped me understand I could love my family members without letting them hurt me. I practiced recognizing when someone was trying to manipulate me so I could shut it down fast before it got out of hand, like it did with the cornea situation. For months after the surgeries, Leo mentioned that Gina landed several new modeling contracts, including one that specifically featured her as a devoted mother who donated to her daughter. The whole thing was ridiculous, since she'd fought so hard against donating in the first place. But now she was making money off looking like a selfless parent. Leo said Gina almost never talked about the surgery anymore and definitely didn't acknowledge how close she came to refusing to help Mia. During one therapy session, I told Miriam I was frustrated that Gina would probably never understand the damage she caused. Miriam asked me what I could actually control in this situation. I realized I couldn't make Gina learn from what happened, only decide how I responded to her going forward. I decided I was okay with keeping things distant but civil with my sister, focusing more on my relationship with Mia than trying to fix things with Gina. Mia went for her 6-month checkup, and the doctor said her healing was perfect, even better than they'd hoped. She could see the board at school now and had started taking art classes where she drew these incredibly detailed pictures. Watching her point out tiny things in her drawings that she never would have seen before made me happy the medical part worked out so well. Even though the family stuff was still messy, my mother hosted Thanksgiving dinner, and I didn't feel anxious driving over there like I used to before family events. I'd made it clear what topics and behaviors I wouldn't accept, and my mother had actually been respecting those boundaries. When my father made some joke about me being the difficult daughter, my mother cut him off and said I'd been right to stand up for myself. I almost dropped my fork hearing her defend me like that. Gina and I settled into this polite but distant thing where we were friendly enough at family gatherings, but didn't try to hang out or talk on the phone. She never actually thanked me for agreeing to be backup donor or admitted her initial demands were crazy. I accepted this was probably as good as our relationship would get, and I was fine with that. Celeste and I met for coffee one afternoon, and she said I seemed way more confident than before all this started. I thought about it and realized she was right. Standing up to my entire family when they were all pressuring me, and keeping my boundaries even when things got ugly, had made me trust myself more. I learned I could handle family disapproval and come out okay on the other side, which was kind of empowering in a weird way. 6 months after the surgeries, I sat at my desk one evening thinking about how much the experience changed my view of family obligations and bodily autonomy. I was glad Mia got the medical care she needed and that Gina eventually did what a mother should do. But I was also glad I refused to let them manipulate me into donating, because teaching my family that my boundaries actually mattered was worth all the temporary conflict and awkwardness. Mom started calling me every Sunday afternoon, asking how my week went and actually listening when I told her about the project I was building at work. She asked questions about the code and what problems I was solving instead of just waiting for her turn to talk about Gina's latest photo shoot. One Sunday, she mentioned she'd been reading about programming languages online so she could understand my work better, and I almost dropped my phone hearing that. She also stopped making those little comments about my clothes or asking when I was going to meet someone, which made family calls way less stressful than they used to be. Leo texted me photos of Mia reading chapter books and doing detailed coloring projects that showed how well her vision had recovered. He'd also send messages complaining about Gina spending 2 hours getting ready for grocery store trips or freaking out about a tiny wrinkle she noticed in the mirror. I kept my responses friendly but short, usually just congratulating Mia's progress or saying something neutral about Gina's behavior. When he started asking for advice about dealing with Gina's vanity, I told him I wasn't the right person to talk to about his marriage, and he should probably find a therapist for that. He backed off after that and stuck to just sending updates about Mia, which worked better for both of us. The elementary school art show was in their cafeteria, with student work covering every wall and table. Mia grabbed my hand the second I walked in and dragged me to her section, bouncing with excitement as she pointed out each drawing she'd made. She had this incredible sketch of a butterfly with tiny details in the wing patterns that she said she could never have drawn before the surgery because she couldn't see the small parts clearly enough. Gina was there with her phone out, taking constant photos and videos, posting them to her social media with captions about her talented daughter. The documentation thing annoyed me because it felt like Gina was making everything about her online image. But at least she showed up and seemed genuinely interested in what Mia created. 8 months after Gina first demanded my cornea, Dad called and asked if he could take me to lunch. We met at this diner near my apartment, and he spent the first 10 minutes making awkward small talk about the weather and traffic. Then he put down his menu and said he owed me a real apology for how he acted during the whole transplant situation. He admitted he was wrong to say my career didn't matter as much as Gina's and that my appearance was less important because I worked from home. He said he'd been thinking about how he always expected me to be the easy daughter who didn't need attention while Gina got special treatment because she seemed more fragile. He told me he was proud of how I stood up for myself, even when the whole family was against me. And that took real strength he didn't appreciate at the time. His voice cracked a little when he said it, and I could tell he actually meant it. So I told him I accepted his apology and wanted to move forward with a better relationship. Gina landed several new modeling contracts over the next few months, and her agent made her donation story part of her professional brand. She did interviews for parenting magazines, talking about the sacrifice mothers make for their children, and how donating her cornea was the most important thing she'd ever done. I saw the articles online and found the whole thing pretty ridiculous, considering how hard she fought against donating in the first place. But the positive publicity made her nicer at family gatherings. She smiled more and didn't make as many cutting remarks about other people, probably because she was riding high on all the attention and praise. I never pointed out how fake the devoted mother image was compared to her actual behavior during those months of pressure and manipulation. Sitting at my desk one evening, working on a debugging problem, I realized I didn't feel that burning anger anymore when I thought about February and March. The whole experience sucked, and my family's behavior was wrong. But I learned important stuff about setting boundaries and trusting my own judgment, even when everyone else disagreed. I was way more confident now in my decisions and less likely to second-guess myself when someone tried to pressure me into something I didn't want to do. The therapy sessions with Miriam taught me how to recognize manipulation tactics early and shut them down before they got out of control. I could actually feel grateful for what I learned without pretending the situation itself was okay or that my family handled things well. We had dinner at Mom's house a few weeks later with the whole family there, including Gina, Leo, and Mia. Halfway through the meal, Mia looked at me across the table and asked why I didn't give her my eye like Mommy did. The table got quiet, and everyone stopped eating to see how I'd answer. I explained that mommies and daddies are parents who have special jobs taking care of their kids, and that's different from what aunts and uncles do. I said parents have responsibilities to help their children that other family members don't have the same way. Mia thought about it for a second, then nodded and said she was glad Mommy was brave enough to help her see again. I agreed that her mother did the right thing in the end, and Gina looked down at her plate without saying anything. December rolled around, and I spent New Year's Eve at Celeste's apartment, looking back on how much had changed since February. My relationship with Mom was actually good now, with real conversations and mutual respect instead of me always feeling dismissed. Dad apologized and seemed to genuinely understand why his behavior was wrong. Mia and I had a solid relationship, and I got to be part of her life without the weird pressure and manipulation from before. Gina and I would probably never be close sisters who called each other for advice or hung out by choice, but we could be in the same room without tension, and that felt like enough. I protected my right to make decisions about my own body, made sure Mia got the medical care she needed from the right person, and taught my family that I had limits they needed to respect. Standing up for myself when everyone was against me turned out to be one of the best things I ever did, even though it was terrifying at the time. So, what do you think? If you were in my shoes, Faced with that kind of intense family pressure and emotional manipulation, would you have folded? Or would you have stood your ground? I'd really love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below.